Hello, everyone. My name is Rita Johnson-Green, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer at the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine. And I want to welcome you to our second discussion of our new webinar series called Building the Future of Regenerative Medicine, Executive Conversations. This webinar series was born out of a number of discussions that we've had with our board of directors, as well as other senior biotech leaders who expressed the desire for ARM to bring biotech executives together with strategic suppliers to share their experiences, to talk about what's going well, to talk about the challenges that they've had and how they've overcome those challenges, and most relevant to this discussion, to talk about what strategic partners help them overcome those challenges, right? And so I want to thank you all for attending today's discussion. I want to do a quick plug for our next conversation, which is taking place on August the 14th. So please take a moment and register for that. And I also want to thank the JLL team, and not only for sponsoring today's webinar, but also just for being great partners to ARM. ARM has collaborated with the JLL team to produce a white paper about foreign direct investment in Japan. And so if you'd like to know more about that, please scan the QR code that you see on your screen right now. And JLL is also currently serving as ARM's real estate advisors and helping us to achieve the best outcome for our space. And today they're hosting our second webinar discussion titled Strategic Manufacturing, Build versus Buy for Cell and Gene Therapies. And we have over 400 people registered for today's discussion, which is fantastic. And so I'm looking forward to celebrating the work that Autolus has done and discussing some of the questions that they've asked themselves as they've navigated the strategic partnership decisions that they've made. And so again, I want to thank Joe Judge, I want to thank Matt and the entire JLL team. And I also want to thank Chris Vann, who is an ARM board member, as well as the chair of our finance committee. And so with that, I will turn it over to you, Joe.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rita, for that wonderful introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you for joining today's discussion. And thank you for all you do to advance cell and gene therapy. And again, Rita, big thank you to you and the ARM team for all you do. As Rita said, yeah, I think there's over 400 folks on the call today, which is really impressive. Your time is valuable. We take this opportunity seriously. But from our perspective, it really demonstrates the power of ARM, the power of collaboration, the impact all of us can have through this knowledge transfer as we are all in this together. There's an expression that I love: success leaves clues. And this webinar platform ARM has created for us is the opportunity for us to understand what those clues are, to learn and to grow together. It's my pleasure to share this virtual stage with two very impressive colleagues that are doing amazing things to advance the mission of cell and gene. My name is Joe Judge. I am heading into my 25th year with the firm. I specialize in supporting our life science clients advance their mission through real estate. I'll pass the baton to my colleague, Matt, and then we'll save the best for last with Chris Vann.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Pleasure to be on the call with you all today. My name is Matt Jackson. I'm an Executive Managing Director at JLL. One of the leaders in our consulting practice, and I'm a member of our Life Science Advisory Council. And I spend most of my time supporting clients with location strategy, site selection, and incentive negotiations. So it's a pleasure to be with you all today.
And hello, everyone. My name is Christopher Vann. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Autolus. I've been with the company for just over 8 years now. My responsibilities include all things commercial, medical affairs, also government affairs, and strangely enough, IT, but that's because there's a peculiarity of autologous CAR T cells, which you need to actually establish systems and processes, not just a market, a product. Prior to joining Autolus, I was actually in Roche Genentech for nearly 30 years in various roles of both strategic marketing and project management.
Wonderful. Okay, we've done our part. Now it's your turn. We want to hear from you. Please introduce yourself. We want to make sure that this message is aligned with who's on the line today. And so we've got a few survey questions for the audience. It'll just take a second. We've asked that you click on the bubbles that best reflect your organization as far as the size of your company, and then also the role that you have with your company. We'll just give everybody a few moments to complete this, and we'll finish our introductions. Okay. The results are coming in. Looks like we have a pretty healthy balance with the leaders currently, with firms that have less than 50 employees coming in around 40%. And then the strongest balance of C-level executives on the line, followed by supply chain and manufacturing. Wonderful. Well, thank you for participating in that survey. Greatly appreciate it, as it's going to help us shape our message today based upon who's on the line. All right. So just a quick intro on JLL in a minute or less. So our roots in founding go back to London, back to 1783, not too far from where our friends at Autolus reside. Our global headquarters are in Chicago, Illinois. And from the beginning, our ambition has been to consistently evolve and meet the changing demands of our clients through our real estate advisory services. If you can see the map, you'll see a lot of dots on this map. We have over 100,000 employees in over 80 countries, which has been driven by listening and anticipating the unique needs of our clients. And it is through the listening that we've continued to shape our services and advance the mission of our clients and ultimately patient outcomes. These services, briefly, as you'll see on the right, include: 1, identifying and securing the right facilities from office, lab, R&D, and manufacturing. 2, guiding you on the cost to lease, buy, or construct the best space for your organization. 3, supporting the upfront workplace strategy and design once a facility is identified. Overseeing the construction and build of your space to ensure it's built on time and on budget. And then ultimately managing the operations of mission-critical facilities, helping you navigate through those necessary regulatory environments, creating that end-to-end solution. And then last but not least, we realize the importance of generating consensus, helping shape appropriate presentations, materials, these are internally and externally, to ensure your leadership, your boards, your investors are clear on your operational needs and the impact your operations will have on your mission. Okay, let's get to the good stuff. Chris, let's get started.
So just
how
a
about we
brief
start with an
introduction
overview of Autolus?
So just a brief introduction. Autolus now just about creeps over into the 500 plus group of companies. We're actually, for those who don't know us, we're a UK-based company. We develop next generation program T-cell therapies. We obviously have a very broad suite of patents, but what we focus on at the moment and what we're close to bringing to market is actually CAR T-cell, autologous CAR T-cell products, and that's relevant for some of the decisions that we've taken in our manufacturing. Maybe next slide. So I think one of the things that's quite interesting, and one of the things that drew me to Autolus, was it was set up from the outset to be a fully comprehensive, integrated biopharmaceutical company. So what do we mean by that? Well, when the company was set up 10 years ago, there wasn't necessarily all of the supporting elements that you would traditionally have for a biopharmaceutical in place for advanced cell and gene therapy products. So we were set up actually to be able to have all of the elements necessary to bring a product to commercialization. It was very much a decision taken very early on that we were in the business of bringing therapies to market, and not actually specifically to look to actually have just a broad platform of technologies, which we may then just take to proof of principle and then actually sell the company. So we were set up with an intention that if we needed to take the market, if there was the opportunity to go to market, we would have all of the necessary capabilities. So, clearly we've got a product we believe is potentially best in class, very close to the market. I'll talk about that later. It's got a PDUFA action date of November the 16th, so that really is very close. We also, on the research side, have a platform of around 100 patent families. We have quite an extensive early pipeline, and one of the things that we're obviously doing in common with many other autologous CAR T cell companies and actually cell therapy companies is we're exploring the use of our products both in oncology and autoimmune. I think one of the really important things, and I think that this has been evidenced by the experiences of CAR T coming to market, it's really important very early on to have a reliable, robust manufacturing process. And that won't be enough. You're also going to need to develop all of the systems and the solutions on the IT backbone in order to be able to deliver the product and to also support the patient to have the best outcome possible. That's, for example, why I'm actually the head of IT. I know nothing about IT. I've actually got a chief information officer, but what I do know is I know what the IT has to deliver in order for the customers to have the experience they need in order for the patients to actually receive the treatment and all of the necessary services around that. And for example, what we've been able to do is to work on those processes so that we can get the vein to delivery time down to around 16 days at time of launch, and we may even be able to shorten that further, which if you've got a product that's being used in a tumor that's very progressive and rapidly expanding, that's obviously one key feature of the services that you have to provide. I mentioned the IT systems, but obviously they're used to orchestrate the product delivery, but they're also important for working with the centers, because I think one of the unique and very lovely things about working in cell and gene therapy is it's a team sport, and we're very integrated with the treatment centers who are delivering our products. And we provide all of the other necessary services to ensure that, for example, that the patient family can actually accompany them to the center, et cetera, et cetera. I think the final thing, but is that I'm going to mention, which is important actually to our story, is we've also, been looking for and have actually built some really important collaborations along the way that have actually unlocked our potential to build commercial manufacturing, and I'll talk about some of that in the future. But I think the two I would really call out are actually the BioNTech agreement, which is recent, and also the Blackstone, and I'll give you more information on the implications of those two a little later.
Wonderful. Chris, thank you for that. I think it'd be helpful if we maybe transition to the manufacturing journey of Autolus. Could you take us through that?
Yeah, certainly. So, I mentioned that we've actually got a 10th anniversary of the company opening up, it coming in October. October 2014 was when we were actually formed. The 10th anniversary will be October of this year. We were spun out of UCL, and I think one of the important things that we have benefited from is academic collaboration with them. And even today, some of the facilities in the London University are actually helpful for us in actually doing early clinical stage work, and they continue to participate in both the clinical studies, but also the manufacture of those academic programs. We actually went into man around 2016, and around that time as well, we actually had an opportunity, and I'll take you a little bit more through this, but we had an opportunity to move the mid-size manufacture of our clinical trial materials to the Cell and Gene Catapult facility in Stevenage. I will skip some of the other things, but I think it's important to know that we're actually IPO'd. We're actually NASDAQ listed in 2018. And then, what we also then did, which we were actually able to use that proceeds to actually open our first commercial manufacturing facility, which was in Maryland, and our US office. But it was around that time that we were actually focused on DLBCL, but we realized that we had a better opportunity in ALL. So what we did was we actually looked very carefully at that facility and realized it was too big to be efficient from a capital perspective. So one of the things we did was then pivot. We actually, and I'll go through this in a minute, we actually sold the lease to that product. And then we actually had to build, though, a facility within 24 months in order to 24 months and then have it commissioned within the following year in order to be able to launch our lead product. So we then started our pivotal study in 2020, which is now the basis of our BLA. Along came Blackstone, which is where we got the money to actually build our current commercial manufacturing facility, which is called the Nucleus, which is based in Stevenage. And then, clearly we're now at the point where that facility has come online and is ready to be used for commercial supply once we launch later in the year. Another final feature that I think is important, I mentioned the collaborations that we had. One of the collaborations we have that's really pivotal to the business, a deep collaboration of many parts, so I won't go through it, but it has a bearing on our manufacturing growth. And that's that we've entered into a collaboration with BioNTech, where one of the features of that collaboration is they have their option to actually have us commercially manufacture their lead program, most likely BNT211, and they can actually exercise that option, and then we would actually be the manufacturers for that commercial product.
Wonderful, wonderful, Chris. Thank you. So that really, really fascinating. So there's an expression: if you want better answers, you need to ask better questions. And the title of this webinar is "Build versus Buy." And there's an intersection, obviously, that many face as they've achieved a critical milestone in their development and are now seeking to scale. Matt, could you talk a little bit about the considerations we frequently see our clients evaluate?
Yeah, thanks, John. So what we've done here is we've really framed up what we see as the key considerations and the trade-offs between going a CDMO route versus an in-house manufacturing route, looking at the differences in the initial capital investment, the speed to market, some of the operational control considerations, and others. Chris, maybe using this as a framework, could you talk us through how you looked at these various considerations and decided on a journey for this particular case to do the in-house, and how those decisions were made internally and how long it took you?
Yeah, so maybe what we can do is, if we go to the next slide, what I can do is I can explain at the points of the journey, what were the key drivers in determining what steps we took. And the reason I gave the history of Autolus earlier on is I always think it's really important to have an understanding of the context when you make decisions. So I'm actually going to start with the mid picture here. And this is actually a suite that is actually operating today in cell and gene therapy Catapult. And what you can see there is you can see each of these little green boxes is basically producing a product, a cell and gene therapy treatment, not necessarily, by the way, just Auto1, because you can see the color coding as a potential actually to make various clinical trial products from in the same facility. And the reason that's possible is because we use a fully enclosed semi-automated machine-based process. The machine that we're using currently is the Miltenyi Prodigy. It's one of the backbones of the manufacture of cell and gene therapy. When we actually set off, this was the most reliable, robust, you could almost argue the only available option. I think this is one of the areas where we're seeing competition. But I think really what's very important to start off with is that, before you actually embark on your manufacturing facilities, you have to have a really clear idea of your manufacturing process. And I think many, and we can discuss this if you want afterwards, I think many companies have struggled because they've had amazing clinical results. They've then gone into pivotal studies, maybe even started building manufacturing facilities, and then found out that their process isn't as robust or ideal for commercialization. So one of the things mixture of good thought and a little bit of luck that we had a bit more time to actually decide upon our lead program. You know, one of the things that's allowed us to actually make the decisions we've made is that we actually have a very reliable, robust process that's very, very consistent. The second thing that I think is really important, because it was a decision for us that I wouldn't necessarily take with other types of product, but because we have an autologous CAR T-cell therapy, one of the key elements around that is the service and support you give to the clinic. So in our particular case, we felt it was really important to actually have control over things like the vein to delivery time, really important to keep things as simple as possible. So we choose to do our cell manufacturing in-house. We've also brought the in-process testing and QC in-house exactly for the same reason, because time is of the essence in our particular business, and we need to reduce complexity and time as much as possible. So to put it, though, into context, we use, therefore, our in-house manufacturing for our cell product, but for our vector, for our active ingredient, we actually are using a CDMO based in Italy, used to be known as Molmed. I think their name now is GDC, because in that case, it lends itself more to an efficient operation. They already had expertise that we could actually leverage, and if you like, the criticality of the timing of the supply chain gives us more flexibility. So I think it's really important to actually give you that background, because the product will always shape the manufacturing approach. And then the question is, well, you know, back to the subject matter of this meeting, should you build, should you buy? And one of the things that we've been blessed with in Autolus is we actually are burdened by opportunity. We have a lot of opportunities to put products into the clinic, and we've always had actually more opportunities than we've had than we've had funding. So one of the questions that then confronted us in our particular situation was, how could we get into clinic and actually supply at a scale that was necessary to conduct both phase 1, but more importantly, phase 2 registration studies? How could we do that and cash spare? So in the UK, and I believe that this has now been replicated in certain other countries, there is a facility in Stevenage, which is north of London, where what you can essentially do is rent a suite within a shared service facility. So this was originally established through an organization, Cell and Gene Therapy Catapult, linked to the UK government. But what that allows you to do is it allows you to go into early or mid-stage manufacturing without the capital or outlay of actually laying down product. You're essentially, I look at it as a hotel model of actual manufacturing. What that allows us to do is basically rent a room. In our case, we rent 3 rooms there, and then you can use it for whatever purpose you want. But the obvious downside to that is you don't have as much flexibility, because, for example, you can't paint a hotel room. There are also, for example, maintenance cycles and things that we don't have influence over. It's also per batch, it was more expensive, but it did actually avoid us having to put down a lot of early capital. I mentioned that we had a kind of, I won't call it a cul-de-sac, but we actually, the Nucleus is not the first manufacturing. Please go back. The Nucleus is not the first manufacturing facility that we've actually built. The first one, and this is where brought me into contact with Joe the first time. The first one that we built was actually in Rockville, MCD. One of the really exceptional things you can do in US that was not at that stage so readily available in the UK was that you could actually, and Europe for that matter, is that you could work with partners such as Alexandra Real Estate to build facilities which were then leased back to you. So this was a project we worked very extensively with Joe on, and the whole point of this was that we were able to have a purpose-built facility for us, FDA approved, which we cited in Maryland, and we can maybe go through some of the reasons for that later, where we could actually again avoid significant outlay of capital, but have nevertheless the purpose-built building, which we were then going to lease back. I mentioned that this facility, it was a brilliant facility. It still is a brilliant facility. We sold the lease to TCR Squared, who then, I believe, sold it to AZ, and I believe it's now an AZ facility. But this facility is fantastic, but we didn't need 5,000 patient capacity for a first indication, so we could not have run it as efficiently as we would have liked, which is why we then subsequently sold on the lease to other third parties. And you know, clearly we learned a lot from both the being engaged in the design of that, also getting the approval for FDA from the plans, and certainly you know, Joe's going to show you in a little while some of the algorithm of the key decision points that you take in actually setting up a site, but they were really instrumental also in shaping our future view of what's important for where we site and build manufacturing facilities. So next slide. So this then brings us to the last step and a third decision. And the third decision started with an oh shit moment, if you excuse the language, because we realized, okay, we have a 5,000 unit facility. That isn't going to be economical for us. And we don't really ourselves want to go into contract manufacturing business. So if we need a 2,000 facility, how do we actually stand this up? And stand it up within essentially 2 years from greenfield site to build. And the other element there is you know, we would need to actually have that supplying commercial product within 2.5 years. A piece of context here, which is why the Blackstone arrangement was so important. Obviously, we're talking about the period around COVID and all the other things that happened in the world. So financing was not really the best during that period. So obviously that securing the financing from Blackstone and actually doing that arrangement was really necessary to get the funding to put this together. The Nucleus, which is our current commercial manufacturing facility, can actually supply the need of our first indication for our first product. It's a particularly unusual and in many ways innovative design, because it's actually not built in Stevenage. The majority of it was actually built in the northeast of England. It's actually pre-assembled modules which essentially fit together inside a metal cage, a bit like you slot Jenga blocks in. And this had a couple of advantages. The first thing is that it actually allowed us to build much of the facility off-site, and this is actually in a shopping mall in the middle of a rural town in the UK. It also allowed us to reduce the build time by 60%. That doesn't mean it compromises on quality at all. In actual fact, it has BREEAM Excellence rating for sustainability. It's also more efficiently laid out inside, because of course, if you're working to very clearly defined designs, you can, for example, pack the wires in a more consistent way, et cetera, et cetera. And this is actually built specifically to actually fulfill our needs for our lead indication. What you can see on the right is actually the pictures of the prodigies actually in the suite that we have validated within the facility, and there are actually 4 suites in there, and also some other spare room that we can actually accommodate for expansion and other purposes. But yeah, so basically we did the groundbreaking on November the 8th, and the facility has now completed validation and has received its, in the first quarter of this year, its UK government GMP certificate, having passed inspection, and is one of the key foundations also, obviously, of our BLA that was submitted to the FDA.
All right, so that brings us to how we went through the process of supporting Chris and his colleagues with identifying the site for the operations. The The mandate that was provided to us was to take a multi-state approach to evaluating different metropolitan areas and identify the location, the site ultimately that would best align with the different objectives. So the process we employed to help Autolus through this process is outlined below. We started in the first step with framing the goals of the project, understanding the different requirements, the project specifications, identifying the criteria that we're going to use to measure the alignment of the geographies with the business operating financial goals of the organization. With that framework in place, we then deployed the team to compile information on the different geographies, to assess the locations using published data, desktop analysis, survey instruments, and other items, to screen and filter the candidates, and then model using quantitative, qualitative methods, the alignment of the geographies with the company's objectives as framed out in step one. When we took the list of candidates down to a more manageable list, we then went into the next step in the journey, which we refer to as validate, where we deployed a team, actually a joint team, into the field to do in-person visual inspections, primary research on the different geographies to confirm the merits and confirm the alignment with the goals of the project. The fieldwork engaged interviews with HR recruitment firms, the government, supply chain experts, visually inspecting real estate, discussing the utility supply to the different areas, etc. Typically, it's a couple of days in the field. And the objective of this step is ultimately to prioritize a preferred location and a backup location for the negotiations of the real estate and the economic development incentives that are available in support of a project. So to go through this process, we had to look at a number of different factors. And if we look at the next table, we've outlined some of the factors here that we would typically look at in helping an organization make what can be a very, very complicated decision. In general, we're looking at a very, very large set of factors that independently have a significant impact on the success of a project, and then in aggregate, obviously, can have a tremendous impact on the project. And we frame these considerations around financial, non-financial, and risk factors. The considerations that were articulated to us of significant importance to this particular project was firstly risk and the avoidance of risk, and making sure we weren't suscepting the operation to a breakage in operations or going down. The operation is very highly sensitive to being operational for as long as it possibly can without any kind of break or avoidance. The other consideration that was very, very high on the list was labor. Specifically the ability to scale and sustain the various employee profiles that are critical to the success of the ongoing operations. We use the word scale to talk about the ability of sourcing specific talent and or relocating specific talent into an area and how desirable that area is. And the word sustain to reflect the level of competition to try and attract and retain that talent in the market and manage turnover rates. And of course, the very unique talent that's associated with these operations, the manufacturing technicians, QC operators, product lease staff, clinical operators, etc. This subset of employees in different geographies in the US and abroad is very specialized and somewhat very difficult to acquire. Another consideration we looked at very closely were the supply chain and logistics considerations, proximity to multiple airports, the ability to get materials in and finished product out to various customers. Access, one of the key considerations was ensuring that the executives and some of the subject matter experts that resided in Europe could get to the facility in a very seamless and time-efficient manner. Real estate and infrastructure, the identification of a suitable site and or facility. I think, as Chris just explained, ultimately doing a build-to-suit to accommodate the very specific needs of the organization had to be identified. Proximity to key government institutions was actually looked at in quite some detail. The National Cancer Institute, the NIH, and FDA in this particular project were looked at and reviewed and ultimately determined to be quite favorable with proximity to those institutions. And then industry presence, just making sure that there was a mature life science ecosystem in place and all the supporting infrastructure that goes within it with such an ecosystem. And then the last thing I would highlight just quickly is the importance of the financial considerations to the project. They were actually, I'd put into the financial considerations in a moderate category, because what we did was deployed a process where we screened out the higher cost locations in the US. So when we started looking at the different geographies that could support the project, we were dealing with a group of candidates we already knew were going to be financially competitive relative to some other geographies in the US. And what we've done here is just basically showing some of the output that was used to communicate some of the trade-offs that were to be made in the selection of what was ultimately reduced to our shortlisted candidates. If you look at the chart on the right, essentially what we did here is we helped the organization understand the trade-offs between the financial considerations, looking at the total cost of operating in the different geographies, the non-financial considerations, which is an aggregate view of all the data points I just referenced around labor, supply chain access, real estate, other items. And then the third dimension was risk, to ensure that indeed we could isolate risk, make sure it checked the box, and we could look at all three factors from a composite view to help the organization make a determination on which geography they believe align the best with the upfront and then long-term operating goals of the project. And as you've just heard, the location that was ultimately selected was the greater Washington, D.C. area and the 270 corridor in Maryland. Maybe on Chris, if we could turn to you and ask, as you went through the process, if there was anything in particular through the journey, as you went through the build model, if you could share any insights in terms of what became particularly valuable to the organization.
Yeah, no, and some of the things I think are quite obvious, and then some of them may actually, we were surprised as we went through the process. So clearly, the company was around 200 people at the time we were looking for the Maryland site. And, we didn't have a footprint in the US. We didn't have knowledge of the market. We certainly didn't know anything about the real estate. You could argue as well, by the way, we're still relative novices, by the way, in the UK and London. But it was therefore important to give a brief and one of the things I think that Joe and others helped us with was narrowing down the objective criteria by which we were going to choose a site. And then there is no substitute for actually seeing what's available. So one of the things that Joe did that was really helpful with the team at JLL is we actually visited sites, and therefore we relatively quickly ruled out that there were buildings that were suitable for our needs. We relatively quickly worked out that we would actually need to have something built specifically for us based on power needs, air handling, and other elements. I think that the site visits were really helpful, but in addition to formulating what type of building we would need, the other things that started to come into play was a recognition, for example, that to find a workforce is difficult. To find a stable workforce that you train and don't lose to other companies is even more difficult. I mean, there's always the risk that will happen, but one of the things that was arranged for us, for example, that was necessary for us to be confident about the Maryland site was that there were vocational colleges that were actually willing to work with us to design vocational degrees, which would actually provide some of our workforce, also close proximity to areas of excellence where we could also get the necessary senior level people to run a manufacturing site. That was very critical for us. So as we went through the process, it would be fair to say that the people element, as we've embarked and got further established with our manufacturing capabilities, we obviously now have a very professional group of people running commercial manufacturing for Autolus, led by Dave Brochure, who's head of our It's not manufacturing, it's actually product delivery because it encompasses all things. So as we've gone down the process, the people element of where you site your manufacturing facility has become, if anything, even more important. And also not just finding the people, but keeping a stable workforce is an essential element of a successful commercial manufacturing area in this area. I think the other area that you helped us, I mentioned that we started realizing we needed a purpose-built facility, or at least one that had been built with a similar product in mind. What that obviously also did was it opened up the need for what type of financial arrangement do we need. And the one that we had a very successful collaboration with in the US was Alexander Real Estate. Actually, in the UK at that time, that type of purpose build to leaseback was not really available. Now we're working with a company called Reef. UBS are funding our manufacturing facility from a financial perspective in the UK, but also working out what kind of financial model you want to operate. Are you prepared to actually do you have the capital, which at the time was not necessarily the case for most biotechs, to actually invest in manufacturing, or do you want to amortize the capital in a different way, which is that you get a facility built and then it's leased back to you. In some respects, you can also do a hotel facility in some locations, which actually may even be cheaper upfront, but you pay more in the long run. And then obviously the other thing I mentioned that would have been possible at that time, another way of finance. Again, it also depends on the particulars of your criteria for what type of outcomes you need in things like delivery times and control over the process. That type of thing is to use a CDMO. And certainly what I will say is in the last 8 to 10 years, there's been a big change in the options available for a new company now. And depending on the product, I think you look at, and depending on your cash flow, I think you look at what type of solution fits best for you. But certainly, I think going through the process with selecting a site with Joe and the JLL group in a way which was very meticulous and systematic was very helpful in formulating some of those ideas.
Wonderful. Matt, Chris, thank you for that summary of the journey. It was a privilege to go through that with Chris and team. So we've talked a lot about the past and the present. Chris, let's talk about the future. What's next for Autolus?
Yeah, so if you go to the next slide, I think it's a really exciting time for us. I mentioned that we're actually very, very close to launching in the US. So hopefully by the end of the year, we'll be in a situation where we're on the market in the US. Europe will follow early next year. Very big clinical pipeline, also moving into autoimmune disorders, where I think that the early data is really compelling, and the patients stand to benefit in a really meaningful way, as the oncology patients do. And then I think what I will say is that one of the things we took on, which was probably braver than we realized at the time, was to be a fully integrated company. So I would say that the company's short-term attention is now very much focused on commercializing our lead asset. But obviously, once we've done that, then we will start the cycle again of preparing for future launches.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, we wanted to save plenty of time for Q&A, and looking in the chat room, we have questions. So let me read through a few of these, and we'll try to get to everybody's questions, some of which may have been answered, maybe not. We'll just start from the top. And I believe the first question is for Chris. You are in a rapidly growing, changing industry. You have had to make a significant change. Have you had to make a significant change to your manufacturing footprint as methods may change?
Yeah, I think a couple of things that may also lead to, are you going to do decentralized versus centralized manufacturing, which I'll address. I think you can see that we've made a number of changes where we actually realized we needed to scale, so we went to Catapult. We then prepared a commercialization based upon DLBCL, which didn't make sense, so we then actually reaccommodated. I think the approach that we've always taken is ideally modular and ideally allows you to be able to expand rapidly in the light of information. That's possible because we actually have, a very robust process which is machine based. If I look at some of the key challenges and key questions we have in the industry, one of them is centralized versus decentralized. And I start with, a bit like a deed poll of pressing the buttons. If you look at what the majority of the large manufacturers of cell therapy have done, they've started as centralized manufacturing. If you look at the people who are principally advocating for decentralized, it's the people who are actually on the side of the industry supplying machines and the products that actually the machines that make the individual products. I would have to say that at this stage, we believe, and we've done obviously calculations on this, the advantages of centralized outweigh the advantages of decentralized. And the reason for this is one, that if you think about the other car, if you think about Model T Ford, whenever you industrialize a process, you actually gain from scale. So the first is that to run a larger factory is actually more efficient than to run a lot of very small factories. The second one, which I think really weighs on the minds of manufacturers, is also the control of the quality of the product. And it's certainly, if you're responsible for the aspects related to the indemnifying safety and indemnifying use of the product, it's much more comfortable to have a greater degree of control over the quality release, particularly if you're operating in a full GMP environment. So those are the two things that drive us at this stage to do commercial. But obviously you've seen that we built pre-assembled modules, so there is nothing to stop us in the future, for example, considering putting smaller units across the world, if you can actually have good control over the quality and quality release, the training, all of the other aspects that are necessary for a successful commercial manufacturing. So I probably answered two questions there, but you have to kind of guess that that's probably the way that the question was leading. So I hope I've addressed the person's question.
Perfect. All right. Next question. Are there hotel models available here in the US?
So I haven't done any research recently, but I heard that, and I heard actually from Catapult that it was actually being copied in Boston and a couple of other areas. Now, whether they look the same or not, I don't know. But this idea of several modules with shared facilities, I think, is one that has at least been looked at by academic centers and even also commercial companies in the US. I don't know if they've been built yet, to be honest.
A question was asked: why not consider the West Coast?
That's a very specific Autolus question, which is, if you think about it, our headquarters and some of our manufacturing expertise, some of the people who support the patients are actually based in the UK. So it just gives us longer working time to actually have an East Coast-based facility in the US. The operating time actually halves if you go to the West Coast. We would end up effectively with 2 to 3 comfortable working hours for everyone, whereas if we do it on the East Coast, we would have had 4 to 6 hours comfortable working time for everyone.
Perfect. Please describe the QC tests you perform in-house. Do you employ rapid Stirling testing methods?
So I think that they're two different things. One is I'm not the expert, but B, I couldn't give you all of the tests that we do. It wouldn't be but what I can tell you is we now do all of the tests that you need for a commercial CAR T, and we do them in-house. The second thing I think is a really important one, where you've got vein to delivery time that's so important. I think it's in the industry's interest to engage the FDA in allowing rapid sterility testing so that you can get the product back to the patient as fast as possible. One of the things we do to reduce vein to delivery time is we actually have a depot model established with Cardinal, which we will use, which allows us to ship actually while the product is actually undergoing a final QC release. So I think things like that will be also very important as we move forward. And certainly I think that, we need to engage the FDA in a more appropriate, faster ways to get sterility testing in place so that the patients aren't being delayed access to the treatment.
Perfect. Not sure if this question was asked before or after you and Matt, Chris, started talking about labor, recruiting and development, but we have a question just around how are you doing on workforce recruiting and development?
Okay, so I presume that's for me, but just to let you know, we've trained 200. We have our own training facility in Stevenage. We've trained 200 people specifically ourselves. And again, that's because we might get people who are trained in basic GMP, but they're not trained to be operators in our facility. So we do all of that work ourselves. And that's actually even more important to where you site your manufacturing, because if you think about it, we are in an area where we can leverage other people. GSK have a big facility in Stevenage, but what we don't want to be is the trainers for the UK industry. So we need to have a very stable workforce. So that's one of the reasons why we're located where we are, and it's also frankly really important to us that we don't just get the talent we need, but we also retain it.
Great. We have a very participative audience, so we really appreciate all the questions. There's a few more. Chris, what's the biggest lesson learned in the decision to go for build over buy? And if you were to go through the decision process again in today's climate, would you have other considerations?
So I think that for our particular manufacturing, the biggest surprise for me was the importance of getting a stable workforce, training them, and the people element. I think when you look on paper, you actually underestimate, the machines and the build is always and they are critical factors. But I think people think it's easier to build a manufacturing workforce than it is. And then I think, remind me that again, the second part of the question. What would we do differently? So I think the reason I actually gave the context of the history of the company is I think you have to take decisions in the context of where you are. And when we've had periods in that journey where the funding was more readily available and periods where it hasn't been available. I think that what's really important, though, is that this is not a easy decision. You need to look at what your horizon is for your company. So are you intending to take this to market? Also, frankly, how are you going to make certain that it's scalable if you're a success? And then equally, if you're not successful, how are you going to reduce the costs? And then I think that the third thing that's really important is this issue of the cash that you have on hand. How do you intend to use it? And one of the great challenges we took on in Autolus was to be a fully integrated company. So we knew that we needed money for development, but we also spent a considerable sum getting the IT systems in place. And we also need a considerable sum to launch a product. So in our case, it made sense to try to change the cash flow profile of the business. And that was exacerbated, if you like, by the fact that we ran into a crisis in the middle of that journey that I should have probably put a black mark in the middle of there, when obviously we got into COVID, Ukraine and whatever, and nobody could raise any money.
Yeah, what a dynamic market we've been in, right? Maybe one more question. How long does it actually take you to dose the first patient once the IND, the CTA are accepted? And do you think that having internal capacity has an impact on that?
So absolutely. One thing I will say when you're thinking about a cell and gene therapy business or clinical trials, your studies may be hampered by the fact that initially you won't be too concerned because there's going to be a dose interval, but as soon as you get into phase 2, you've got to have enough capacity, but you also need what I call headroom space, because patients don't come along like buses, they come along in clusters. And so, if it depends again, if the indication you're working in is rapidly evolving, something like autoimmune, it wouldn't be so difficult to space the patients. But if you're in a relapse refractory oncology indication, for example, you need to actually allow a surplus capacity so that you've got slots. You can also make adjustments if a patient, for example, has to delay their treatment, so on and so forth, for their apheresis. So if you have some spare capacity, it's absolutely going to speed you up.
Great. And maybe one last question, last one. In your manufacturing model with multiple progeny units, how do you ensure efficient segregation and chain of custody or identity for starting materials, products, samples, or raw materials when manufacturing for patients concurrently?
Yeah, so it's not one thing, frankly, and there are all kinds of devices. You saw one of the devices we use, which is different color neon lights for the different products. But we have a whole. Obviously, we also have, for example, for our commercial manufacturing, which we'll start using for clinical trials soon. We actually have a cell orchestration platform that we have ready to be rolled out. So we have a whole range of measures, but that's a discussion for a whole day in its own right, because but what is really important is, in order to be able to do that, you have to have very rigorous separation of the products coming in and so on and so forth. So we don't tend to handle in that particular facility, we wouldn't handle in an open environment more than one product at the same time.
Great. Thank you, Chris, for that rapid fire session of questions. Really, really appreciate it. And Matt, thank you also so much. And as we close, just a huge thanks to everybody that joined the call, for giving us your most precious commodity today, your time. We hope you enjoyed the discussion. And as we can see from the Autolus journey, it doesn't have to be a binary decision, making a decision to either buy or build. It can be both, right? Diversifying your risk, your speed to market, other considerations. It's always a one-size-fits-one approach. As Chris and Matt also emphasized, one of my other key takeaways was finding the right talent and labor is such an important ingredient. And said differently, this is a people business, and you make all the difference in the world. And I've heard this, and I thought it was very appropriate for today. Not all superheroes wear capes. Most work in labs across the globe, working on life-saving technologies to make our world a better place. And so we want to thank you to all of our superheroes on this call, and a huge thanks to our superhero here, Chris Vann. Chris, we wish you and the Autolus team amazing success, especially on November 16th and beyond. So for us, for the three of us, this concludes our call, and we wish a great day to everybody. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks. Take care.